How about a jerky company? I love beef jerky. Come on, jerky companies. I don't see empathy as a bad trait.
And this idea that empathy is actually a sin. Who gets empathy?
They're discarding everything they just learned or read because their political beliefs don't allow them to be that way.
Welcome.
I have a loud clap. Go ahead.
I have allowed pretty much everything.
Yeah. No,
actually, this is a question I think we've asked people before. Who's louder, you or me?
We are a firecracker.
I am a firecracker.
According to an 80-plus-year-old listener, you're a firecracker, Kristin Brey.
So who do you think's louder, you or me?
I think you are.
Probably.
I don't know, maybe. I can be loud.
I think my voice carries probably more than yours does. Yeah. I have a very loud laugh.
Well, you were a thespian at one point.
I was a thespian.
And an athlete and all kinds of other... You've had like 18 million jobs.
All right, welcome to episode 11 of the You Need to Listen podcast. I am Kristin Brey. He is Steve Scaffidi. How you feeling today, Steve?
I'm good.
You ready for your vacation?
Yes, I'm going to Scotland shortly, and I'm very excited about that.
Going to Stonehenge?
That's in England.
And it's called Hedgestone.
And it's Henge. Stonehenge.
Henge. Stonehenge?
Yeah, not hedge. Hedge is like a bush row. Oh my God.
All right, so today, I have been wanting to talk about this for a while because I feel like it's entered into the zeitgeist. But let's start with the definition of the word empathy. Mm-hmm. The ability to understand and share the feelings of another. Would you consider yourself an empathetic person?
Very.
Do you?
Yeah.
Do you feel like when you walk into, would you say you're an empath?
No.
No, I wouldn't either. What makes you
do you feel like you are?
An empath? No, I think that word's dumb. But I do feel like I am hyper aware to my own detriment of other people's feelings, especially in social situations, of trying to make sure everyone is. And I don't know if that's more being a people pleaser or being in tune with other people, but I would say trying to be aware of where people are coming from. I think I lead with that.
I'm someone who considers themselves very empathetic towards other people's, especially when they're suffering. I hate to see people suffering, and I will shed a tear if the story is sad enough and it hits at my soul. So I don't see empathy as a bad trait. I mean, there is a piece you just kind of alluded to it where you can take that too far and your life becomes their problems and not the things you should focus on. Whether that makes you an empath or not, I don't know. But it's like you can be fixated on just doing that side. And there's obviously classic examples throughout history of people they just care about other people, never themselves. Like from Mother Teresa to, Gandhi, right? Their suffering didn't matter. Other people's did. Man, that's a heavy burden to carry around. So I want to be empathetic to people's problems. I want to understand what's bothering people. I want to, on occasion, cry with them because sometimes that's therapeutic.
And also, I think it's also putting yourself in someone else's shoes to understand their experience and how it is different. Anyways, let's get to the point of why we're talking about this. Because what has entered the zeitgeist is empathy as a weakness, which is something that Elon Musk said on the Joe Rogan podcast a couple months ago. But what I didn't realize is that this is actually anchored in evangelical Christians and this idea that empathy is actually a sin. And I, being not evangelical, I didn't know that this is like kind of been percolating for the last 6 years, and that basically it's more like, I feel like it's very antithetical to a lot of Christianity, as we've talked about before, when the Pope died, of what I feel like Christianity is rooted in when it does come about empathy and serving others and serving and helping people who are suffering. But this empathy is a sin. It's basically been around for the Christian right for the last couple of years. It started with a pastor and theologian named Joe Rigney, and he published a book called The Sin of Empathy, which has drawn, obviously a lot of debate. And is it, because I feel like the argument is exemplified exactly how you just said. There is something you can do at a personal level of too much empathy as an individual is for your own detriment. And the argument seems to be, whether it's Elon Musk or some of these evangelical pastors who buy into this, is that at a cultural level, at a civilization level, making decisions based off too much, quote, empathy is also detrimental for society.
That's a different point. The book is trash as far as the thesis of the book. I'm just going to say that. Empathy is not a bad trait.
It's not a bad thing. It's also what makes us human, right?
Yes,
Isn't it one of the things that like differentiates us from? I don't know. I actually don't know enough about other mammals to know if they feel empathy.
It's the twisting of faith for nefarious reasons or for bad reasons. I guess even easier to say than to say it that way. And you mentioned Elon Musk. He considers empathy like one of the worst traits of modern civilization in this country. That's a pretty declarative statement about, and you're completely wrong, and he's wrong about it, but it certainly demonstrates or explains why he acts the way he acts. He's a know-it-all. He thinks he's the smartest person in the room, and on some topics maybe he is. But he also lacks the things that makes people human, makes people considerate of others people's feelings and their lives. Also, tolerance, inclusion, all those things sort of go out the window when you basically, as this author made the claim, that this is somehow something we should not be. That's never been part of faith. It's a twisting of faith. And frankly, as I said before, it's trash. I don't buy into it. This is one of those things we agree on, but what frustrates me, drives me nuts, is we seem to be rationalizing now bad behavior because of politics. How is
not
this
because of reality TV?
And reality TV.
I got a lot of pushback from the last episode.
Trust
for people
me, I've
who
been hounded by a teammate every damn day about that one.
All right, anyways, let's not go down that rabbit hole
But
again.
I think when you look at faith, faith should make us better. Not find ways to sort of ostracize people or remove them from faith generally, just the concepts of good behavior, treatment of others, treat others as they
treat you.
Yeah. That's sort of the cornerstone.
Or treat others as how you want to be treated, I should say.
As yourself would be treated.
So here's when we talk about what empathy is. So I was talking to a friend who's a doctor. He's a doctor here, but he had practiced also in the UK. I think he said the UK. But he was saying how in different countries with socialized medicine, because it's socialized medicine, there are some rules as far as like if you are 80 something or a certain age threshold of certain procedures are not going to be covered. Right. And I've also heard similar, I forgot which Scandinavian country it is, where if you opt in to have a child who has Down syndrome, like a lot of the things that you can now screen for, they will not be covered on the socialized medicine. Right. And that is an example, I think, of not having empathy for the individual because of you were trying to protect and support the whole, which is obviously the inverse of how we talk about healthcare here. But not that anyone's saying that our healthcare system is working for many people here, but as far as who gets empathy, because ultimately I do think that there is an argument, and I'm not agreeing with them, of empathy for individuals when you hear individual stories that can represent a larger group, but how much that influences policy, because exactly that, like in the examples of the socialized medicine, the empathy to take care of the most sometimes sacrifices people who are aging and people who have honestly, that kind of sounds like eugenics, which I'm not saying I'm to support it, but it poses an interesting question of like empathy for whom.
I'm just on the specifics of the Down syndrome one, I would be horribly opposed to that.
Same. Listen, I have an uncle with Down syndrome. I know a lot of people
with families that have that same situation. No, that's an enrichment, not a degradation of one's life when you have someone that has Down syndrome. So set that aside. I get the argument about socialized medicine, and I see where you're going, but to me, this is a political conversation. Completely.
But healthcare is political.
Yeah, everything's, as we said in our first or second podcast.
No, I know, but that's what I mean. As far as like that is policy, that's a policy choice.
Driven, yeah, and that's where it touches politics. And I think as we've seen sort of politics devolve for a lot of different reasons, one which we'll talk about in our next podcast, the behavior, the conduct, the actions, the words of the current...
The cruelty.
The cruelty.
The cruelty of our current politics.
Yeah. We see now, and this speaks directly to what you were talking about at the beginning, the sort of explaining why people of faith should look the other way or not care about people the way that traditionally faith told them they should. It's like a justification for bad behavior, whether it's policy, politics, the individuals. There are examples every day of people acting horribly in governmental positions in Congress, in the Oval Office, in governor's offices, that in the past, and I'm obviously generalizing and overstating because there's always been bad actors, but it's just become commonplace where we're mistreating people, we're treating people as the others. Like, this is the way we should be. It's the good old days argument. Things were so good when we didn't worry about that stuff. Well, no, you should worry about that shit because it matters, and those people may need your help.
But also, I love that the good old days of was when Jim Crow was still
it was
legal,
never that
right?
good.
So it was like, what are we talking about? As far as there's never been a time that there hasn't been marginalized groups who've gotten the short end of the stick and not been empathy was not necessarily accessible to them for
Women,
the people who had power.
Black Americans,
Native
Hispanic Americans, Native Americans.
But even go further back, the Irish.
Homosexuals.
Yeah.
Pick one. So when you say good old days, or you sort of pine for those days where things were easier and, women wore dresses and you went to church every Sunday morning and you said hi to all your neighbors who looked exactly like you did. That's not the world we live in now. This is we talked about this on the show. It's a melting pot. There's going to be a lot of different storylines just in whatever group you're a part of. You better start figuring that out. And part of that figuring out is empathy for other people's stories and lives.
But so what is the
fix?
No. Why do you think that this is something that, because if it was just in evangelical groups that were promoting this idea, but it's obviously been co-opted by tech bros like Elon Musk, and it's getting introduced into the vernacular, right? As far as people making this argument that empathy is a weakness, empathy is a sin. So as far as how is that useful for the people who are adopting that mantra?
Because they have to justify their votes. When you have, again, we're going to do a whole podcast on Donald Trump, but when you have a president who is convicted of raping a woman, who has been married multiple times, had multiple affairs allegedly, and maybe I don't even have to say allegedly anymore, who says things that are, no president should ever speak some of the words and phrases he uses, including how to grab women, which apparently wasn't enough to disqualify him from the office, at least in the minds of voters. So what you see is some, not all, let's not blanket all members of faith, the faith community, but some, and you mentioned evangelicals, who have to justify the fact that they are supporting this individual or some of the people around them. They have to find justification. One of them is writing a trashy book like that, which basically says, throw empathy out the window. We're doing the right thing. We're doing God's work. God would not be signing up for that or that trash that's written in that book. He would not. That's not what God was. That's not what Jesus is. And I that pisses me off as a person of faith, and I still consider myself that. I'm not at every church, but I go to church. I was in church 3 months ago now. And I went to Catholic school, as did you.
Mm-hmm, I did.
There are certain things that sort of we learned. And I hope that one of the things we learned as a former altar boy and somebody who went to church 6 days of the 7 days of the week, sometimes every damn day, because there was Saturday night mass after a while. And this is a long time before you were born, when we had all these different options.
I went to Saturday mass.
Did you?
We had Saturday evening mass.
I wasn't sure when that came in, because it used to be, you got to go on Sunday morning. No, there's Saturday mass.
There was Saturday nights.
There's a guy playing a guitar
always, I always felt a little bit hipper.
Yeah, there's a drum set in church. Anyway, got off subject. So when you have that history where people actually knew how to treat each other, I've said this a million times on this show and other shows. We send people to church, or they go to church, and they listen to their pastor, preacher, whatever, imam, and they give a message usually. There's some message, whether it's the text of their faith or whether the leaders, their spiritual leaders, just saying, this is how to live a good life in our faith. And then there's those people that listen to that, and they nod their head and show up every week and whatever that day is of worship, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, whatever it is. And then they walk out the door and they throw that shit out the window. And I don't mean to use shit in the concept of faith, but that's what they're doing. They're discarding everything they just learned or read because their political beliefs don't allow them to be that way, the message that they just got. That pisses me off royally.
So then, if we're differentiating between having empathy as an individual, which I would argue is a good thing, and the argument for why empathy is good policy, would you make that argument?
Yeah, it is good policy, because what do we see with the current sort of de-evolution of empathy and feeling nice towards other people, feeling, like they're part of your community. We've seen more vitriol, more hate, more things happening to people that are now victims because of their faith. That's not a good development. And I know people say, oh, he just overstates it. It was always there. It was probably always there, and we can go back in history and find horrific examples, but history was never kind to anybody.
Well, it's kind of the victors, isn't it?
Yeah. Whoever had the biggest sword and the strongest fighters, they won the war, and then they got
to write the history books.
Yeah, and keep all the gold and all the women. That's basically the story, right? So we sort of evolved to a point where that wasn't the case, where your brain could actually be part of that conversation, where you're actually thinking, common sense, logic, goodwill towards other men and women. That sort of became the norm. And now we're seeing sort of, again, not to overuse the term, a de-evolution of that concept where, gosh darn it, maybe men are better. Somebody was just saying this. Like, I wish I could remember who said this. Maybe men should be the leaders. Like, really?
Because you guys are doing such a good job.
Yeah, because you haven't fucked it up over the last few millennia with your great leadership. And we see it day to day, every day. How you doing on that? We still haven't had a woman president in this country, and I'm somebody who said since the first day I ever spoke on a microphone, women are smarter than men. And I believe that stronger today than I did 8 years ago. They, for whatever reason, maybe it's evolution, maybe it's DNA, genetic, whatever it is, women seem to have evolved to a place where they are more empathetic.
Yes, I would agree with that.
They seem to think through they problem solve better. And they seem to retain knowledge of their prior experiences to make them smarter next time. Where guys, it's like the frickin' first time they ever saw a problem, and it happened to them last week, but it's like, it's all new to me again. I don't know what I did last week. That's the problem. So this empathy thing.
Do you think that is a male thing?
Yes.
Of just repeating the same, the definition of insanity, just doing the same behavior and expecting a different outcome?
Yeah.
Like this time we'll figure it out.
Who was I just talking to? Maybe it was on the show, maybe it wasn't. The fact that we're living in this age of just stupidity. It's like, my God, why is this even a conversation? We see it every day in stories. Like, the president talking, what was he talking about recently with one of the world leaders? Just, he's not a history expert, but he wants to recite the country's history of the leader he's talking to, who has lived that history, knows it 100 times better than this president does.
Wait, what?
I don't know which one it was. These Oval Office meetings drive me freaking nuts.
Wait, was this the one with the German chancellor?
That was today. No, this is one a while back. I'll think of it.
Okay.
But it just come on. But that's the arrogance that we see from some men in leadership positions. I know it's a long way from empathy, but I think empathy is a trait that good leaders should have.
But is it good policy?
I think so. We should care about each other. And I think there's always ways to make everything
Do you think
work.
is it someone who's always saying, I'm a Republican,
I'm not going to indict all
conservative?
conservatives because I know a lot.
No, but I'm saying, would you argue that is a conservative tenet?
Now? No. Because now MAGA controls the conservatives.
Okay.
And so now not. It's not a common trait. It doesn't mean it's not held.
Was it? Did you, what would be your argument as far as how empathy showed up in the conservatism that you identify with?
I mean, politics is obviously a weird way to make that leap, because whether it's Reagan, Bush, I mean, you pick a Republican president, there's things about those presidencies that sort of violate what I'm about to say, but I think there are some conservatives, and I'm not going to give you a name. John McCain might be an example of who understood the big picture, understood the power of faith, understood sacrifice, certainly, because he was in a POW camp for all that time and suffered physically. But he also understood you had to be empathetic, and he cast some big votes in his career before he passed from cancer.
The big thumbs down?
Yeah, which shows you that he understood that. So that would be a conservative example.
Do you think he did that just to piss off Trump, or do you think he actually believed in it?
Oh, I believe that's part of it. But maybe he knew something before the rest of the country knew something about Donald Trump. Because I would agree with him on that. That was a smart play. So if you ask me if I have empathy, absolutely.
I know you do.
Yeah.
Here's a final question, I guess, if we're going to start wrapping it up. Do you notice how many more questions I ask you than you ask me?
That's fine. Want me to ask you questions?
I'm going to ask you this one because I think it's interesting.
I'm going to pepper you with Trump questions.
Would you say it's important, if you're just saying that empathy is good to have as an individual, it's good as policy, would you say it's something that we should teach in schools?
Yes, but we don't.
That we do. That is like the emotional learning that a lot of the Moms for
public
Liberty.
school?
Yes. So a lot of the new doctrine.
Then I learned something.
The new this is what a lot of like Moms for Liberty and a lot of these groups, and even you've said, you're like, we should just teach the basics.
Right.
Because schools had been adopting like emotional learning, right? Of like learning how to name your emotions, learning that like constructive ways to deal with your emotions, learning how to have empathy for others. And so like a lot of the things that get under critical race theory and DEI is actually at like the elementary educational level, much more about like interpersonal relationship and communication. And people are trying to say that is not what we should be teaching our children, when I would argue it's fundamentally one of the most important things to have as a functioning adult.
Yeah, respect for others is taught. I know that because they teach it in elementary school. Keep your hands off.
But also learning how to like process your own emotions and not, like it's like literally. My neighbor is a principal at a Catholic school in and around Milwaukee, and they had to send a 3-year-old home early. He's in 3K, and I was just like, "What happened?" And she's like, "Well, he was just having his way of processing emotions that day was to like pull down a bookshelf and kick and scream." And so it's like teaching kids how to work through that, except like beyond just fear of getting in trouble, teaches people how to do that as they get older and not turn to drugs, not turn to violence, not turn to all these like very negative vices that I think most psychologists would say stem from an inability to actually have empathy, even empathy for yourself, and actually understand your emotional process.
Yeah, I don't disagree, but I still think we should teach the basics first.
But they are teaching the basics.
When we my words, dumb down the coursework to include everything under the rainbow, I'm not using that term for any other reason, just to include everything. I think we got away from the core things, and it shows up in reading scores. And
is it that we got away from the core things, or we got towards teaching towards tests? Because how we evaluate schools.
I'm not an enemy
tests.
of tests. I was someone that thrived.
So you think like No Child Left Behind was a good thing?
No Child Left Behind? I don't know.
Because that's at least what I understand as far as our educational history. When they put that in place, teachers started teaching towards a test instead of actually being focused on like fundamentals. And like it's also when they got away from teaching civics.
Yeah.
Because there was such an emphasis on reading and math that some of the other coursework that I would say now a lot more people should, it would behoove us if more people understood and had taken more civics classes.
Education is a whole nother topic because I'm married to a teacher and she has strong thoughts about all this. That process is ongoing and constantly evolving. It's generational. It's different each generation because of what they're exposed to, what they have access to, the technology involved. It's a hard problem and hard nut to crack, which we know because we've seen what's happened to our schools. And then, oh, by the way, let's throw a pandemic in, which if you want a clear example of two things. One, lack of common sense. And two, lack of empathy. Let's go back and look at how we treated the pandemic, where people were just ostracized for wearing a mask.
I know. Like you want to talk about since our next podcast is going to be about predicting the future. I remember very, very early in the pandemic, I was sitting at my parents' house. I was having all these calls trying to figure out like what As Goes Wisconsin was going to be. And this is before the first wave of protests at the Capitol happened. So this was end of March, early April. And I remember having some of these conversations and being like, maybe this is something that will heal the world. Because it was like for the first time ever, the entire world was going through the same thing. All of these countries were going through lockdowns. Every country was having different outbreaks. And it was something that when you talk about empathy, and it's a good place maybe to end, that everyone was going through in one way or another. And all of a sudden it became this like very central thing that we could relate to. And we still can relate to it. Like, what did you do during the pandemic? Did you lose anyone? Like, did you change jobs? All these different things. And so there is still that touch point that we share. But boy, was I wrong as far as it deepening our empathy for one another instead of igniting more of our differences.
Which, by the way, just to put a pin on it, historically is exactly what happened 100 years ago. The same thing.
With the Spanish flu?
Initial empathy and then all the stupidity and lack of, science. We can't trust science.
Yeah.
And the dangerous thing about the last pandemic in 2020 and after is it's fundamentally shaken at our core many people's, not all, belief in just the core principles of how we do business every day as a human being.
And systems in our institutions.
Yeah. That's what drives me nuts. Good podcast.
Good podcast.
Good conversation. Be empathetic. I mean, that's the message.
Yeah. Don't. It's not a sin. It's not a weakness. It's actually a strength.
And, you know, I like action. So my action is I'm going to be more empathetic towards people because I think that's what we try to do on our show. Certainly, we try to explain things. We had a show recently where we had both sides on a very important issue related to healthcare. Mm-hmm. That's sort of being empathetic to all sides, which I know people say, oh, you don't do all sides. Yeah, we kind of do. And that's something that I take pride in.
Same. All right.
You need to listen.
It's a good podcast. Please share with your friends. We're trying to get listenership up. Mm-hmm. If you would like to sponsor us, we would love to talk to you.
How about a jerky company? I love beef jerky. Come on, jerky companies. There's got to be one out there.
What's a Wisconsin based Jack Link's? There you go.
Let's go, folks.
I'm surprised you don't know someone there.
I do know someone.
See?
Yeah, I'm always working something.
All right. Well, if you would like to get a hold of us, my email is kbrey@goodkarmabrands.com.
You know what mine is?
scaffidi@goodkarmabrands.com.
That's the long one.
Or Steve at
Scaffidi, 2 F's 1 D at WTMJ.com. You know, some of our teammates have just their first name.
Oh,
how do I get that?
Probably the people who've been here for like 20 years.
No, some of them are new. Anyway, that's like my minor irritation of the day.
Is that the only one?
You know, we're talking about... What are we talking about next podcast? Oh, you know.
I know. Our next podcast, we're going to talk about what the Republican Party or even America looks like in a post-Trump world.
Oh, my God. That's a good topic.
It's a lot of speculation.
Yeah, which I love.
All right. See you next time.
Ciao.